At our wedding, my husband confessed to me that he had cheated with my 18-year-old niece and proposed to her on the same day. Just before I could say my vows, my fiancé ended the wedding. He said he was in love with my 18-year-old niece. In front of everyone, he took the ring he had chosen for me and gave it to her instead. She accepted his proposal without hesitation. The guests were silent. I stood there, unable to move. My wedding was over before it even began. We had been together for 8 years. We lived together, built a home together, and for a long time, I thought we would eventually get married. It wasn't something I pressured him about, even though I wanted it. He always said marriage was just a formality, that we were already committed, and I believed him. Then, a year ago, he proposed, and I thought it was because he was finally ready. Now, I realize it was just a distraction. That same year, my niece moved in with us. She had just turned 18 and was starting college in the city. She needed a place to stay, and as her aunt, I couldn't say no. At first, it wasn't an issue. She was family. She had always been like a little sister to me, and I wanted to help her. But as the months passed, things changed. My fiancé started doing things for her that he never did for me. If she needed a ride, he dropped everything. If she wanted something, he bought it. He laughed at everything she said, rearranged his schedule for her, and made her problems his priority. I noticed, but I told myself I was overthinking it. He was just being kind. Then, he started canceling our plans because she needed something. I confronted him once when he left our anniversary dinner early because she called him. He brushed it off, saying she was young and still figuring things out. It didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I didn't want to be the jealous, paranoid fiancé, but I should have listened to my instincts. Because in the end, I was right at first. I didn't think much of it. He had always been good with my family, and she was young, still adjusting to life in the city. I assumed he was just looking out for her, the way any supportive uncle figure would. But as time passed, it became clear that his attention toward her was different. He started focusing on her in a way that felt off. Whenever she talked, he gave her his full attention, even if I was mid-sentence. If she needed something, he was the first to offer help. If she was struggling with school or work, he would drop whatever he was doing to figure it out for her. When she laughed, he laughed louder. If she complained about something, he immediately tried to fix it. She wasn't oblivious to it. She started seeking him out more. She dressed differently, tighter clothes, more revealing tops, styled her hair more often. She giggled at things he said, playfully touched his arm, found excuses to sit next to him on the couch. She made little comments, saying she couldn't relate to boys her age because they were so immature, how nice it was to have a real man to talk to. He never corrected her. At first, I pushed away the uncomfortable feeling, convincing myself I was imagining things. But then, I noticed how much he changed around her. When I asked him to help with something, he acted tired, but when she needed help, he was suddenly full of energy. When we spent time together, he seemed distracted, but if she was in the room, he was fully engaged. When I tried to make plans, he suddenly had other things to do, plans that involved her. The small things piled up. They had inside jokes that I wasn't part of. If she asked for something, he found a way to get it for her. When she spoke, he looked at her with interest, like he was trying to impress her. If I asked him about it, he brushed me off, saying I was imagining things. One night, I woke up and found him missing from our bed. I walked into the living room and saw them sitting together, whispering. As soon as they noticed me, they moved apart. He said they were just talking, but she smirked as she got up and went to her room. That was when I knew I wasn't imagining anything. I told my niece she needed to move out. She pouted and acted like I was being unfair, but I didn't care. I expected my fiancé to support me, but instead, he got angry. He said I was overreacting, that she wasn't ready to live on her own. He defended her like I was the problem. A few weeks later, he proposed to me. I asked if my niece would be at the wedding. He said yes. I didn't understand what he really meant until I stood at the altar and watched him put my ring on her hand. Planning the wedding should have been the happiest time of my life. But something felt wrong the entire time. My fiancé seemed distracted whenever we discussed the details. He didn't care about the flowers, the venue, or the guest list. The only time he seemed engaged was when I mentioned my niece. I asked him multiple times if she would be attending, and every time, he reassured me that of course she would be there. He even seemed irritated that I kept bringing it up, like it was obvious. I didn't understand why I felt so uneasy about it. Maybe it was because, after I asked my niece to move out, she barely spoke to me. Maybe it was because, even after moving, she and my fiancé still found ways to see each other. He made excuses. She needed help with her car. She needed advice. She was struggling with something. I told myself I was being paranoid. On the day of the wedding, I pushed all those thoughts away. I focused on getting ready, reminding myself that this was the man I had spent nearly a decade with. I loved him. He had chosen me. I told myself everything was fine. Then, I walked down the aisle. I remember the moment I reached him. He wasn't looking at me the way I had expected. His expression wasn't nervous or emotional, just tense, like he was preparing himself for something. My hands were shaking, but I smiled, waiting for the vows to begin. Then, in front of everyone, he took a step back. "I can't do this," he said. There was a murmur in the crowd. I froze. I thought he meant he needed a second, that he was overwhelmed. But then he turned his head, and his eyes locked onto someone in the crowd. My niece. I'm in love with her, he continued. I've been in love with her. The guest gasped. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I wanted to believe this was some kind of sick joke. But then, as if this wasn't already humiliating enough, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring, and walked toward her. It was the same ring he had chosen for me. The ring I had worn during our engagement. The entire room was silent. My niece stood up, hesitated for only a moment, and then held out her hand. She accepted. He slid the ring onto her finger. I don't remember much after that. My vision blurred. People were whispering. My mother was crying. My friends were in shock. The officiant stood there, unsure what to do. The man I had loved for years, the man I had planned to marry, had just proposed to my niece in front of me, in front of everyone. And she had said, yes. Everything felt unreal. The whispers from the guests grew louder. Some people stood, some sat in stunned silence. The officiant hesitated, glancing between me and the man who had just shattered my life. My mother covered her mouth, shaking her head. People exchanged looks of disbelief, but no one moved to stop what was happening. He slipped the ring onto my niece's finger. She didn't hesitate. She admired it, twisting it slightly, as if this was always meant for her. There was no shame in her expression, no regret. She stood next to him, smiling, while I remained frozen at the altar. Then, as if I no longer existed, they turned and walked away. Guests shifted in their seats, making way for them. A few people gasped. Some murmured among themselves. Others left quietly. My body refused to move. My mind refused to process what had just happened. My mother reached for my arm, saying something I couldn't hear. My entire body felt numb. The dress I had carefully chosen felt heavy, suffocating. The ring that had once belonged to me was now on someone else's hand. A wave of humiliation settled over me. The man I had trusted for years had been with my niece behind my back. He had used our home, our time, our life together to build something with her. Instead of ending things privately, he had destroyed me in front of everyone. My wedding had turned into their engagement celebration. The realization fueled something inside me. My vision cleared. My ears picked up the murmurs of the guests, the shifting of chairs, the awkward shuffling of people unsure of what to do next. Then, among the whispers and stunned silence, came something else. Laughter. They were laughing. That was it. Without another second of hesitation, I turned. Lifting my dress so I wouldn't trip, I walked away. My mother called after me, but I didn't stop. I pushed past the guests, past the photographers who stood frozen, unsure whether to continue capturing this disaster or pack up their equipment. Reaching the exit, I stepped outside. I didn't look back. I didn't stay out long after leaving the wedding. There was nowhere to go, no plan in my mind. I drove around aimlessly, the reality of what had happened sinking in with each passing minute. When I finally went home, I expected silence. I expected to sit in the empty house, trying to piece together the remains of my life. Instead, I found him there. His car was already parked outside. The front door was wide open. My stomach twisted. I stepped inside, and there he was, packing his things like it was just another day. Bags lined the entryway, some open, revealing his clothes, shoes, and whatever else he had decided to take. He barely glanced at me. Without hesitation, he kept moving through the house, pulling things from shelves, opening drawers, piling more of his belongings into bags. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't flustered. He had planned this. I stood frozen as he grabbed the watch I had gifted him on his last birthday. The same watch he had told me he would cherish forever. And I noticed something else. It wasn't just his things. Some of the things he was packing weren't his at all. My heart pounded as I watched him take the necklace he had given me for our anniversary, the purse he had surprised me with last Christmas, a set of expensive headphones he had bought me a few months ago, things that had been mine. And then I understood. She wanted them. My niece. The girl who had taken my fiancé, my wedding, my future, now she wanted the things he had once given me. And he was taking them for her without a second thought. I forced my voice out, demanding an explanation. He barely looked up. He said my niece liked these things, and since he had bought them, they were his to take back. He spoke like he was talking about something trivial, like this was just a casual transaction. I couldn't breathe. He took everything without asking. The small gifts, the thoughtful surprises, the things that once held meaning between us. He stripped away every last trace of what we had. When he was done, he picked up the bags, gave me one last look, indifferent, emotionless, and walked out. The door shut behind him. I was alone. The silence in the house was unbearable. I stood in the middle of what used to be our home, staring at the empty spaces he had left behind. The closet, half empty. The shelf where his books used to be, bare. The small decorations he once bought, gone. But the worst part wasn't what he had taken. It was what he had deliberately removed. Every sign that he had ever loved me was erased. The framed photo of us from our first vacation together was gone. The handwritten note he once left in the kitchen, telling me he loved me, had disappeared. Even the blanket we used to curl up under on the couch was missing. As if I had never existed in his life at all, But the most humiliating part was the things he had taken that weren't his. The gifts he had once given me, now repurposed for her. The necklace he had placed around my neck, now meant for my niece. The purse he had given me for Christmas, now in her hands. The possessions I had assumed were mine, claimed by the person who had taken everything else from me. I should have been angry. I should have screamed, thrown something, broken down completely. But I didn't. My body refused to move. My mind refused to react. All I felt was emptiness. Hours passed, but I didn't register the time. My phone continued buzzing, filling up with messages from family and friends. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to answer their questions, to hear their pity, to be reminded that everyone had seen what had happened. At some point, my mother arrived. She let herself in, taking one look at my face before pulling me into a hug. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just stood there, numb, as she told me I didn't have to stay here tonight. That I could come with her, but I couldn't leave. This was my home. The place I had built with him. The place I had imagined a future. And now it felt like a hollow, meaningless space. I stayed. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled like him, but he wasn't coming back. Every part of my life had been ripped away in a single day. My relationship. My wedding. My dignity. And now, even the things I had once held on to were gone. There was nothing left except one question. Where did I go from here? The next morning, reality settled in. There was no escaping it. The man I had planned to marry had left me for my niece. He had proposed to her at what was supposed to be my wedding. He had come back to her home, not to apologize, not to explain, but to take everything he wanted, including the things he had once given to me. And then he had walked away like I was nothing. I stared at the mess he had left behind. Open drawers, empty shelves, spaces that used to hold memories now stripped bare. My wedding dress was still crumpled on the floor where I had tossed it. The engagement ring, the one that had been meant for me but was now on my niece's hand, was gone. I sat on the couch, barely able to move, as my phone continued buzzing with messages. Some were from friends, checking in to see if I was okay. Some were from relatives, stunned by what had happened. Others were from people who just wanted gossip, pretending to be concerned. I ignored them all, but then, in the middle of the flood of texts, I saw his name. A single message. You should move on. It wasn't meant to be. That was all he had to say. No apology. No regret. Just a cold, dismissive statement, as if the years we spent together, the home we built, the life we planned, had meant nothing. And then another message came, this time from her. I hope we can all be civil about this. She didn't even have the decency to pretend she felt guilty. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Every part of me wanted to respond, to tell them exactly what I thought of them, to scream about how they had destroyed everything. But I didn't. There was nothing I could say that would change what they had done. Instead, I stood up. I grabbed a trash bag and started throwing things away. The half-burned wedding candles, the seating chart I had spent hours perfecting, the framed engagement photos that were still sitting on the table. Every reminder of them, of what had been stolen from me, went into the bag. He wasn't going to let them take anything else. By the time the sun started setting, I had packed up everything that reminded me of them. The house was still empty, still filled with the absence they had left behind, but for the first time, it felt like mine again. I wasn't okay. I didn't know when I would be. But I knew one thing. They had taken enough from me. They weren't going to take my future, too. The days that followed felt like a blur. The phone calls kept coming. Family members, friends, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had something to say. Some were outraged on my behalf. Others wanted to hear the story straight from me, as if my humiliation was just entertainment. I ignored most of them. My mother stayed with me for a while, making sure I ate, making sure I didn't completely shut down. She wanted me to stay at her place, but I refused to leave my home. I had already lost too much. I wasn't about to let them make me feel like I needed to run. Word spread quickly about what happened. My niece and my ex-fiancé didn't bother hiding their relationship. They posted photos together, not even a week after the wedding. Comments poured in, some congratulating them, some calling them out. A few people even messaged me to ask if it was real, as if I could make something like this up. Then, another blow came. My niece announced that they were already planning their wedding. The same guests who had watched my world fall apart were now being invited to celebrate them. Some family members refused to acknowledge it, disgusted by what they had done. Others, to my horror, were willing to attend. I tried not to care. I told myself it didn't matter. But Aditi started questioning everything. How long had they been planning this? How many people had known? How many had suspected but said nothing? Had I really been that blind? Every time I thought I had hit the lowest point, something else reminded me just how deep this betrayal went. Now, I'm left trying to figure out what to do next. I gave years of my life to a man who threw me away without hesitation. I took in a niece who used my kindness to get close to him. I built a future that was stolen from me in front of my own family and friends. I don't know how to move forward from this. Should I cut off every family member who supports them? Should I move to a new place just to escape the memories? Should I confront them one last time just to make them feel the pain they caused me? I don't have the answers. All I know is that I can't stay like this forever. I need to do something. I just don't know what that is yet.